Hey YouTube, welcome to Lost in a Good Place. In this multi-part series, I will share my experiences on a 7-day Alaska cruise, starting with the popular embarkation port of Seward, Alaska. The three topics that I will cover are: number 1, the most common cruise itineraries involving Seward; number 2, how to get to Seward; and number 3, what to do in Seward, especially if you arrive at least a day in advance of your embarkation time.
When cruising through Alaska, there are 3 main itineraries you can choose from regardless of the cruise line or ship. The first is northbound, departing from Seattle or Vancouver. You'll generally hit some combination of Juneau, Ketchikan, Icy Strait Point, Sitka, and Skagway. The second is southbound, departing from Seward and hitting the same cities. Disembarkation is generally from Seattle or Vancouver. When we went this past May, we decided to go southbound and therefore started in Seward. The third is a round trip where embarkation and disembarkation is either at the same city or 2 cities that are fairly close to one another, such as getting on at Seattle and getting off at Vancouver. For round trip itineraries, there are typically more days at sea, and they can also be longer than one-way itineraries. For example, earlier in May, the Celebrity Edge had a round-trip schedule starting in Vancouver with making stops only in Juneau and Skagway, with a final stop in Seattle.
Seward is a port city in southern Alaska set on an inlet on the Kenai Peninsula. While our cruise didn't leave until Friday, we made a strategic decision to begin our flight from home a full 2 nights before, just to be safe. It might seem overly conservative, but here was our thinking. There aren't many flights that fly from the lower 48 states directly into Seward. We live in Northern Virginia, where we have access to 3 primary airports: Dulles, Reagan, or BWI, but there are very few affordable flights that fly into Seward nonstop. So instead of a one-stop in, say, Seattle, where we'd be stuck in an airport for potentially a few hours, we decided to take a direct flight to Seattle 2 nights before and stay there for nearly 24 hours. One advantage of Seattle, other than being a city with plenty of things to do, from Seattle to Anchorage, it's only a 3-hour flight, and typically you'd want to fly into Anchorage before getting to Seward. Regardless of where you're flying from the lower 48, Anchorage International Airport is generally the way to go since it's a much bigger and accessible airport than Seward's airport. But then it begs the question, when going from Anchorage, how do you get to Seward? Well, we figured out there were 3 options. Option number 1 is to take a bus, and that's the preferred option in my opinion. We decided to take Alaska Tour and Travel. The whole process was smooth and even enjoyable. You do ride a coach bus, but it's not like a Greyhound bus where you could be miserable the entire time. Instead, the driver of our bus was hooked up to a mic and gave us some interesting commentary the whole trip. Because of this, the bus felt more like an interactive tour rather than simply transportation that takes you from point A to point B. The pickup for the Alaska Tour and Travel Company is at the conveniently located Anchorage Convention Center, which is located centrally downtown, and drop-off exists as multiple drop-off points in Seward. Option number 2 is to organize transportation through the cruise itself, but we heard the cost is about $116 per person, which is quite significantly more expensive than the third-party bus that we took. The last option is to take a cab, but there are 2 problems with this option. The first is that it's really expensive. I looked up the cost out of curiosity and was quoted $270 for an UberX. That might be worth it if you have a very large party where you can split the cost at least 4 ways, but then you have to deal with the longer wait to even call an Uber. In this area of Alaska where it's not very populated, there's no guarantee that the driver will accept you, because most drivers will have to make that 3-hour trip back from Seward to Anchorage. Okay, so now let's say that you've arrived at Seward. What to do? Given that we arrived the night before, we did have all the morning of the next day and even part of the afternoon to explore the area before we boarded the ship. Seward is a pretty small town, so the town itself won't keep you very busy outside of maybe 4th and 5th Avenue near the Alaska Sea Life Center. In my opinion, there are 2 top attractions worth checking out before you board your cruise. The first is the Sea Otter Trail, which is a paved walking, biking, and running trail that runs parallel to Resurrection Bay. It's worth waking up early during sunrise when the town is still asleep and take in the snow-capped mountains and see your cruise ship docked in the distance. The trail runs a couple miles long and has RVs and campsites on one side for a portion of the trail. As you can see in these pictures, there are plenty of opportunities to take in the scenery, especially early in the morning when there's barely any other pedestrians around. The second option is Kenai National Park, which is technically outside of Seward, but it's easily accessible via shuttle, and it'll only take about a 30-minute drive. We decided to book with the company called Exit Glacier Guides, which offers round-trip transportation nearly every hour from 8:30 a.m. through the late afternoon. Now, Kenai National Park is a very small national park, so there are basically only 2 primary hiking trails to choose from, which differ significantly in difficulty. The first is the more difficult trail, and it's called Harding Icefield Trail. This trail isn't for the faint of heart. It's nearly 9 miles as an out and back, with a combined 3,200 feet of elevation gain. Though if you don't want to or have the time to commit to that full distance, then you could stop and turn back once you reach one of the 4 viewpoints along the way. It's worth noting though that because the trail goes up so high in elevation, there is the complication of needing to traverse through significant amounts of snow. When we went in late May, there were a number of reviews on the All Trails website stating that poles and snow spikes were needed. The second trail, which is much tamer, is called the Exit Glacier View and Overlook Loop. This trail is only 2.2 miles in length and is rated easy by All Trails. We completed this trail in slightly over an hour, and that included time for a snack at the Overlook area, which is located closest to the glacier. Regardless of what trail you choose, in Kenai National Park, do note that there's 0 cell service, so it's best to download offline maps and book your round-trip transportation back in advance. If you enjoyed this video, then please like this video and subscribe to my channel, Lost in a Good Place.